All right, everybody, welcome back. So, this is week two. All right, week two, the month of January. I started off with talking about accountability, and that is the main topic for the month of January. Just to recap, week one, I talked about taking accountability and two different types of accountability that I've noticed actually exist. One being passive accountability, and the other one being active accountability. And just as a reminder, passive accountability is kind of like when you know something happened, you know the role that you played, and you may make excuses for your behavior, even though deep down you kind of feel and you know that it could have possibly been handled differently, even if it is a situation where you were reacting to a negative experience, right? So you just kind of are really passive about the experience, about the role you played, what you did, and what the result was. And then there's active accountability, where you actually revisit the situation and you listen to those feelings that are telling you, like, I shouldn't have done that, or that's not me, or I could have done better in that situation, even if it is the result of something negative that's happened to you, right? Some bad experience, right? So that was week one, passive and active accountability. And I really hope, just because I go from week to week does not mean that we forget about what we've learned from the week prior. Taking accountability is a process, it's an everyday thing, because when we revisit these themes, right, we don't want to fall back into the habit of passive accountability, okay? So for week two, what we're going to talk about is why taking accountability can be difficult. Um, it's easier said than done to take accountability for your actions, right? Because if you're doing it correctly, that means that there was something that you did that you shouldn't have done and that you could have done better. And majority of the time, we want to feel like there's nothing that we could have done better. And we will make excuses for our behavior, even if we know that our behavior is not becoming of us, or that it could have been handled differently, right? Okay. One of the first reasons I want to address as to why taking accountability for your actions as a result of a negative experience can be difficult is because you taking accountability for your actions feels like you're dismissing the cause of the reaction that you had, and that you're dismissing what caused you to make some bad choices, right? And then secondly, taking accountability for your actions as a result of a negative experience also can feel like you're giving the perpetrator a pass, or perpetrators passes as well. Because when you think about take accountability for my actions, what do you mean by that? They did such and such, she did such and such, he did such and such. And it's not to dismiss what they did, right? It's just to say, this is what happened, this is what I did, and honestly, it could have been better. Okay, that's all. That's really all it is, right? Because the whole idea around what I am wanting for you, and also for myself, because this is something that I practice daily as well. So, what I am wanting, and what I'm sure you're wanting by watching these videos, is progression, right? You don't want to feel stuck anymore. You want to be your best self, right? And wanting to do that requires that we acknowledge and do some uncomfortable things, right? It requires that you kind of get out of your skin a little bit, and that can be scary, okay? But through this process, you will learn how to deal with all of the ins and outs associated with elevation and and personal transformation, okay? So, reiterating it, feeling like dismissing what caused your reaction and feeling like it's kind of giving the perpetrator a pass, it is absolutely not that at all, okay? What it actually is, it's really your gateway to freedom, okay? Typically when we walk around and we're holding on to things that have happened to us, and don't take this the wrong way. I'm saying this because I lived it for years, okay? So I know what it feels like to constantly focus on pointing the finger at what someone else did, right? As opposed to looking at self. And once you take accountability for your actions, it shifts the focus, right? The focus is no longer on those people. The focus is on you, where you want it to be, have wanted it to be as well, right? And so when you take accountability, it's like saying, okay, I'm not perfect. What can I do to better me? You know, what can I do to feel better about me? Let me address me, you know? And that just involves admitting your wrongs, okay? And admitting where you need improvement, okay? Also, I want to say that taking accountability is also a catalyst to acquiring and living in healthy freedom. And what I mean by healthy freedom is there's freedom, right? There are different types of freedoms, right? And when I say living and acquiring healthy freedom, this is a freedom that does not involve hurting others, and it doesn't involve hurting yourself in any way, shape, or form. This is the truest freedom that you'll ever be able to feel. There's no ball and chain associated with it. There's no guilt or shame associated with it, right? This is absolute freedom, autonomy, right? And so with that, talking about autonomy, so there may be a tendency to create emotional, even physical, spiritual barriers that make taking accountability even more difficult, right? And what I mean by that is, prime example, me, right? But I know, you know, we have all had similar experiences, right? So, barriers that we will create is kind of like the blame game, right? We don't want to address the situation fully, because that would mean that we actually have to stake claim to where we were mentally when it happened. Did we allow something to happen? How do we end up in the situations that we were in? And these are all legitimate questions, because if there's a need for change, if there's a need for healing from something, then you just innately know that some changes need to occur, right? So we will create barriers, right? We could block people out. We could hold really tight to our pain, which blocks our spiritual progression, mental and emotional progression, because holding on to your pain is like putting up this wall. And it's not that the wall is blocking outside influence, because it doesn't. But what it is blocking is you from fully feeling and living and breathing in abundance, really. In a way that you haven't before, in a more healthy, freedom-like type of way, right? Okay, so also focusing on what others did to us breeds contempt, that contempt can turn into anger because it turns into frustration. Why? Because we couldn't control what happened when it happened. We can't control what they decide to do or decide not to do after they've done it, right? And that is, what's the word I'm looking for? It breeding contempt and frustration. That is your ball and chain, okay? Because contempt, frustration, and anger are all indicative of not really acknowledging the full situation, okay? And what I mean by that is not acknowledging what happened to you, but really more focusing on yourself so that you can get that development that you're looking for, which comes from taking accountability for your reactions, okay? And even actions that you started yourself, not just reactions to things, okay? So this is the reason why also people feel kind of imprisoned by their experiences. It's because they're in a negative thinking cycle of what happened to them. Now, this also does come with having some conscience, right? Because you have to have some conscience to know that, hey, I shouldn't have done that. And I like to believe that everybody does, okay? So, and that's what I'm trying to get to for you to connect to, get back to, if that is where you are in your life, and really start living by that, okay? Because honestly, your conscience never steers you wrong. It's just the decisions that we make outside of it, okay? So I'm gonna need to wrap it up here, but okay, so with all of this, forgiveness is something that is just as important, okay? When you want to feel better about situations and you just want to be a better person, you don't want to be triggered into these wild and crazy reactions. You don't want to be triggered into cussing somebody out. You don't want to be triggered into breaking stuff, fighting, or even, you don't even want to be triggered into depression. You don't want to be triggered into emotional or mental instability because you're tired of it. So along with taking accountability for your actions, you also have to forgive the situation. It's very hard to forgive people. And in my experience, if you can't literally like forgive the person, forgive the situation, okay? Forgive what happened, okay? It's not always easy for people to forgive the person. It is not easy to sit in the same room with certain people. It's just not. That's life. I say that's okay. What has really and truly helped me is acknowledging what happened, acknowledging how I felt about it, and really just forgiving the situation, the happening, okay? One more thing before I get out of here. So another reason why taking accountability matters is because it frees you from guilt and shame that you were never meant to carry. So what happens is things happen to us, and it can be repeated. Things happen and we end up feeling ashamed. The experience is a shameful experience. You didn't do anything to be ashamed of as far as what happened to you, right? You didn't do anything to be ashamed of. You didn't do anything to feel guilty about. But the happening inadvertently has you carrying weight that never belonged to you. Okay? And so starting to focus on yourself and wanting to better yourself and saying, what could I have done differently in certain situations? Because no, this does not apply to every situation. However, I will say this. Your reaction does not have to necessarily be toward another person. It could be reactions toward yourself, right? Overindulging, getting drunk, getting way too high. Those types of behaviors. Self-destructive behaviors are also majority of the time due to a negative experience that you've had, and you are, it's like lashing out in a different kind of way, and both ways are harmful, okay, to you, okay. So what I want you to take from this video today is, yes, taking accountability can be difficult, right? Because we feel like when we do that, it means that we're giving our perpetrators or whatever happened a pass. It feels like at first like we're ignoring what's happened, okay? And I cannot stress enough how that is exactly not what it is, okay? Taking accountability for your actions is the first step in you moving toward that person who you knew you always could be and the person who you want to be. People change, you know, and sometimes hanging on to negative experiences and not knowing healthier ways to cope and not knowing how you should even really feel about it will keep you hindered from doing those things and becoming that person that you really want to do. So for next week, which is going to be week 3, I want to talk to you all about the expectations we have once we start taking accountability for our actions, okay? And we all know we have expectations, so it's like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge mine, and when are you going to acknowledge yours, right? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about in week 3. I want to thank everybody who has watched. Of course, I truly appreciate you all, and I hope that you stick with me on this journey and we can just keep learning and growing together. All right, love you all. Bye.